Well, thank you everyone who's here with us here in the room and all of our friends on Zoom. I'm really excited for our first seminar of the semester. And before I introduce our speaker and before we kind of kick this off, I want to introduce Professor Aaron Johnson, who's going to spend a moment to talk about our new EER participation guidelines, and then we're going to also share those in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. So for those of us online, there is a sheet with a QR, sorry, those of us in person, there's a sheet with a QR code, and Karen is going to put the link in the chat. Please take a look at these. We wrote these to clarify the goals and purpose of the seminars, which are to build and strengthen connections within the EER community, provide professional development and networking opportunities for speakers and attendees, and to engage in respectful dialogue about current and ongoing research that involve methods uncommon in engineering. And so to facilitate these goals, we have 8 guidelines that we're asking participants to follow. There are more details if you go online, but I will read them at a high level. First is to be cognizant of your airtime. Center the research being presented in your questions, thoughts, and clarifications. Give presenters the opportunity to share what they've prepared. Listen respectfully without interrupting. Listen actively and with an ear to understanding others' views. Critique ideas, not individuals. Avoid assumptions about any member of the class or generalizations about social groups. In other words, don't ask individuals to speak for their entire social group or what you perceive their social group to be. Be accountable for your words and their impact. Keep confidential any personal information that comes up in the conversation. In other words, lessons may leave, but stories should stay. And provide constructive feedback in line with our goals. So you can take a look at the link that Karen sent or the document we have here. If you have any additional thoughts, questions afterwards, you can email Karen, who's the seminar coordinator, or myself. Thank you.
Just a huge thank you to Aaron for developing those for our community, and thank you everyone for looking through those and upholding all of those values that we have for the EER seminar series. So now I'd like to introduce, I'm so super excited that Stephen Secules is here from Florida International University to speak with us today. And I've been following Stephen's work for several years, and I know several of us in our community have been as well. And I'm so super excited he's going to talk about one of the projects that I really admire that his group has been working on with the Audio for Inclusion project. So please join me in welcoming Stephen, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all. It's exciting to be here. You have like different sets of like ways of talking about yourself, and realize that I'm about to talk to people that might not know me without like a bio slide at the beginning because it's not a job talk. So I'll just say I have a background in engineering. I got a master's degree in acoustics and worked as an acoustical engineer for 5 years, which is like a little bit of like when it came time to start pitching NSF projects, I was like, what would be fun? What do I have as like unique skills? I was like, I think I should like work with audio, make a podcast. Like these are like, I should figure out how that is my research. So just like there's a little, we're gonna have like talk about impact and equity and inclusion issues, but there's also just a little bit of like, yeah, sometimes you think of your own strengths and what's fun to you, and then go try to do that. So that after being an acoustical consultant, I went to University of Maryland for a PhD in education, curriculum instruction, and then kind of like journeyed through that PhD in towards engineering education, like at UGA, Purdue, and then I'm at Florida International University. So yes, most of my work is focused on equity and inclusion. Most of it is, almost all of it is qualitative. I'm going to be talking about, I've kind of like been requested to speak to the Audio for Inclusion project. It's kind of a crowd favorite, but I'm gonna like use that to talk about research designs in general and how we think about the impact our research designs are having, and maybe like pivoting if we think the research design is like not having the desired change we think we want to be having in the world. So that's like a preview about the like specifics and the broad of what we're talking about. Yeah, these are little, it's mostly an audio project, but I like to make little like visuals so you have ideas of what you're talking about. So as a preview, these are the avatars of the students of the narratives that we'll be hearing from later. They all take 5 to 10 minutes, so we can only really listen to one, but I'll be sharing the links to all of the rest. You can feel free to read and give me feedback on all the rest of them. Fatima, I think you just don't touch the Zoom, just like keep it clicked on the PowerPoint so that this clicker works. Maybe Karen can help input people. Okay, great. What do you associate with the following words? I'm just like an interactive teacher, so I like to start from hearing what you all think. Knowledge generation, intellectual merit, evidence-based quality, rigor. Just think about them all. Inclusion, marginalization, support, access, equity. These are kind of going in themes. You can guess it at the themes, the schema that this like brings up for you. Impact, innovation, transformation, intervention, change. Just think for a second. We can go quick on this. Differences between columns and where does broadening participation fit? Any ideas, quick ideas?
First one looks like more traditional assessment stuff, and then I see broadening participation as being both of the two right columns.
Sure. First one, and yeah, like some of the times maybe the way we would characterize these kind of categories is to use the same words. So yeah, maybe this is kind of like the quality and rigor, like kind of like what's the like substance, like the quality. Yeah, I think you gotta use the same words sometimes. How would you define the second column versus the third? Anybody?
I think what comes to mind is DEI initiatives with that second column.
Mm-hmm. And the third?
I'm seeing sort of like process and outcome.
Mm-hmm.
How is differentiating?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me, I was thinking, yeah, these are like same as Robin. I was thinking these are kind of like the quality column. This is kind of like, if I'm thinking about like who uses these vocabulary, like the DEI crowd uses these vocabulary a lot. Some of these might have a lot to do with change and intervention, but like these are less the institutional change like and impact words and more the kind of diversity and inclusion words. And then these are, yeah, kind of the outcomes, the impacts. So yeah, I think I agree, broadening participation might have to fit kind of everywhere, but maybe especially is in the columns 2 and 3. So I'm also thinking a lot about kind of I'm thinking a lot about broadening participation as a thing that probably needs more of this like active verb in it in order to be achieving itself, right? Like if all we're doing is like kind of, I was telling the students earlier, if all we're doing is like talking a lot about the marginalization just keeps happening, but we like don't fix it, like broaden, like undo it in some way, then we're probably not living up to the verb implied in this. So just thinking about these words are a little bit static, but important. These words are important and not completely static, but these words are kind of like the way we bring about outcomes we might be looking at. So why focus on change? What's the urgency? I had 2 types of urgency. You get at the front of like a lot of papers, the numbers just aren't moving. I'm not much of a statistical argument person, but the numbers just aren't moving is true. So kind of over the years, I think if, engineering ed departments, broadening participation scholars are continuing to kind of like, produce work, and if that work is not having the desired impact, that would be one form of urgency, why redouble and think about change. And I live in Florida, and my thought is if we don't start kind of like proactively thinking about change in positive directions, we're all about to go backwards, like negative directions. I don't know if you're aware of all of the anti-DEI legislation, but kind of if there were things that I was able to trust and kind of like work with in my institution that had positive impact in supporting students around DEI initiatives, they're all mostly gone, and I'm kind of left by myself, and I'm still trying to think about my research as what can it do, how can it be impactful? That's where I'm at now. I know we're all in a different state here and you all have different research agendas, but just to speak to where I'm at, how I'm thinking about this urgency now. So I like, a lot of these are kind of like my mantras, my like go-to sentences about the world. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. be the change you want to see in the world. These get attributed to lots of different people. Some people think Mahatma Gandhi said the second one. He didn't really, apparently, on the internet, so I'm not really sure. But they're nice sentences, they're nice ideas. So my thought about these is we can't, particularly if we're investing in broadening participation research, but I think also engineering education research in general, we can't let our research be merely knowledge generation and inert regarding this oppressive system. We have an ethical responsibility to ensure our research is oriented towards change and justice. Kind of like we've got to be somewhat pragmatic and impact-oriented about our work broadly, kind of together as a community. I just want to mention, because we're also in grad student summer, I do also think there's a place for learning, listening, preparing. I don't mean to kind of blame anybody who's just getting started for not yet changing the world individually. I mean, this is kind of like a collective challenge to all of us, particularly reflecting on myself and kind of like where should I be headed as kind of more responsible for leading, being a part of leading change. I think it's great to be thinking about these early on as a grad student, but I don't particularly mean it's your individual responsibility to change everything right now. Okay. What's typical diversity inclusion research? I was going to have that like just as a question for you, but I also have been doing a little bit of a systematic literature review myself, so I have some answers. You could think about if you had answers, but we've been looking at 450 papers on diversity inclusion and kind of mapping what people are doing. I'm still mid-progress. This is not quite how I want to publish this yet because other needs to be broken down into some other things. Other is like an overwhelming percentage right now, but among the things that I have coded in this data set, documenting students' experiences of marginalization is the like number one thing broadening participation researchers are doing. There is just a lot of that happening. Other things that are happening, faculty perspectives on DEI, sharing best practices from recommendations, talking about classroom practice, descriptions of practice, research-based testing, strategies, hypotheses, experiments, interventions for DEI, theorizations of DEI. And some of my other categories include my own kind of like systematic literature reviews, workplace studies. Workplace studies aren't really a different category. I'm just trying to really focus more on the educational environment, so we're gonna toss that one out. Anyway, big picture takeaway is just we're doing a whole lot of this. We're doing a whole lot of documenting students' marginalization, which would lead me to ask kind of, is that producing the change we want to see in the world? This is a paper in Studies in Engineering Education where me and Cassandra McCall were thinking about change, kind of how to model and think about change in research designs. That's just simple participants data analysis dissemination audience. That's kind of what all research is doing in some way. All social science research is looking at most of those pieces, I think. Typical quantitative research on diversity might be looking at pathways, trajectories, and presenting findings and recommendations in journals and conferences, documenting inequities, looking at policy impacts. Typical quantitative research via surveys might be looking for significance, presenting those recommendations in journals and conferences, determining statistically significant factors for something like an engineering identity. Qualitative research, this is kind of like that large bubble of that pie chart, looking at students with a shared identity, conducting qualitative interviews, coding for themes, presenting findings, recommendations in journals and conferences to document presence of marginalization, generate knowledge about marginalized populations, make calls for more institutional support. Sorry, I'm going fast, but you get the idea. Faculty with reported inclusive practices, kind of a faculty practices study, conduct interviews with them, code for themes, and kind of share what faculty are doing, generate knowledge of best practices. My thought about each of these is kind of, these are each individually, particularly if we kind of like accept that the kind of endpoint is a journal, that possibly my audience is not, the audience I might be trying to impact, maybe if I'm thinking about engineering faculty, they might not be reading my journal articles. I would argue that a lot of these are not actually, they don't have an exact mechanism to change an oppressive system kind of built into them. They're ineffective parts of a broader strategy, but they themselves may not be changing. So I think changing the system will require innovation, creativity, collaborating with practitioners and leaders and each other, crafting our research products to be useful to the people who need it. These two I think are really crucial in the way I'm thinking about it right now. I'm thinking, a lot of times we make an impact, our definitions of impact very individualistic. I have these citations, I have these grant dollars, I have these dissertation products, I conducted this research. No individual is going to be able to have all, if I am the researcher, then I am not kind of engaged in a 9 to 5 weekly engaging with faculty and faculty development sessions and kind of meeting them. I don't have the ability to be everywhere, everything everywhere all at once. So how can I look thinking collaboratively, thinking about research products that I'm making and how useful are they to the other people who I can partner with. So that's, I'm sure there's others. I'm sure there's other ways that changing the system will, things that will be required. But some personal observations, particularly in my world of diversity, inclusion, qualitative research. In the system of kind of inclusion and marginalization, I would say professors often misunderstand or aren't aware of student perspectives and unintentionally perpetuate marginalization. These are my own kind of rough, kind of claims. You can disagree with these and have some other take. You might say maybe some intentionally perpetuate marginalization. I would say that that's probably a pretty small, I talk to a lot of engineering faculty, I think a lot, that's a pretty small group of the real mean bad apples. I think a lot are in more this space of misunderstanding, not busy, misunderstanding, not aware, only really think about people who are a little bit more similar to them, which then biases towards their own demographic groups, etc. So if we take that as one premise, most diversity researchers focus on documenting their marginalization, not somehow testing a strategy for change, somehow looking at a way to alleviate marginalization. Qualitative diversity researchers generate understandings of student perspectives through interviews, but these researchers use long-form papers professors may be too busy to read. Obviously, I kind of put myself in these categories, in kind of all these categories. I might see myself, so I don't mean to sound judgmental. I myself have written lots of student perspective of interviews, papers that I am not sure are really changing the world with engineering professors reading them. So, some principles for the research redesign of audio for inclusion. Rather than focus on documenting marginalization, we're still doing some interviews with students as the main, talking about marginalization as our main research, but we want to test a mechanism for change, what could those interviews be useful for? Rather than prioritizing the journal paper output that is most easy and most incentivized for me to create as a professor or as grad student, adapt the form of research output for accessibility and immediacy towards my audience if I'm trying to meet faculty. What could I ask them to engage with? And I'm thinking about communication gap, kind of thinking about the empathy and awareness of these professors as again, not something built into them and intentional, but as just if you lack the awareness of your students, then you're not going to be that type of professor that is really good at providing the listening ear and you get lots of people flocking to office hours to kind of unload. You might often put your foot in your mouth and say the wrong thing and kind of come across as uncaring, and then you don't learn about students who are different from you and how to care for them more. So this is kind of a working theory of the change process that I wanted to suggest through this research. So that brings to the Audio for Inclusion project. In this project, we interview students, we construct narrative scripts from the transcript. We organize these around, we had to kind of trial and error pilot these a little bit to kind of think what's too much information, what's too long, what's kind of attention spans, how do we have clarity? Everybody's life is so complex. But if people talk about 4 different major kind of intersections and marginalization at once, then people are having trouble following it. So we've kind of worked them out to be 5 to 10 minute student narratives that kind of that represent the student, but get themed around a certain topic. So sometimes when the student has shared 2 distinct things with us, we just look at how long the narrative is becoming. And for instance, we separate, this is going to be Sophie's narrative on mental health, this is going to be Sophie's narrative on gender marginalization. We could have put them together, but then you're asking people to listen to 10, 15-minute things and they lose focus. That's some of our narrative construction. I have a contact that I know from the School of Theater who can give me student actor contacts who are happy to be paid an Amazon gift card, which is convenient because that's the easiest mode of payment that I can hand out. So yeah, we have the student actor in. I have another slide that has more of these details on it. I shouldn't get too bogged down here. Mostly we've been using YouTube to kind of collect and disseminate for now, but we'd like to expand some of those to be on like ASAE, CDEI websites and things. And then right now we're in the process of processing our faculty focus group feedback. We brought different of these narratives to groups of faculty and kind of tested out how they reacted to it. This is the rest of my research team. I think I need to switch. I think it's going to work to listen to this one. If I switch to
Most. I think I'm doing like as well as other college students are. It's college time and it's stressful, but it's fine.
How do you identify personally and in engineering contexts?
Mental health wise, I don't have anything diagnosed. I think I'm doing like as well as other college students are. It's college time and it's stressful, but it's fine. Usually, the classes in the university go at a really fast pace, and the university has an issue with mental health. I think a lot of people here were overachievers in high school, and then when you come to the university and you start struggling, and I'm sure that can really mess with an identity of like who you thought you were. However, one time that was kind of affecting things was during COVID. My sister has mental and physical disabilities. So when I was home, I had to help her with some of her classes while still maintaining my own. And that was frustrating because, professors really don't really slow down for much. But I didn't have enough of the situation I felt in which I could ask for really special treatment or accommodation. Also, I don't want to sound like I would be using my sister as an excuse or anything. That feels weird. Yeah, so it's not like professors are ignoring my situation specifically, because I did not ask for any time or anything, but they don't really leave wiggle room for it if you're in any situation that might not be dean excusal level, but it still makes things harder for you. Also, I've heard dean excusals can be a little strict, so I wasn't about to try and go through that process. So these additional obligations are not really seen by professors, but are there, and they affect my schoolwork. They don't leave room for things like that, and then it ends up like I'm home and I'm trying to help my sister with her classes, and still having 3 exams in one day.
What's one thing you would change about engineering education if you could?
If I could change one thing about engineering education, it would be considering academics above everything and not valuing mental health. Most professors will be like, oh, care about your mental health and get some sleep, make sure you eat something healthy, go eat food or something. And then you're like, I have 4 exams, can I turn in my homework late next week? And they go, yeah, if you want a percentage off. That really varies per person. There are some wonderful professors who will make adjustments. I had one who would check for big events like capstone or other major finals that were happening, and he tried to schedule around them for as many people as he could. He adjusted it so it would be less stressful for as many people as he could accommodate. I have another professor who's like, I know midterms are super busy, so, we have exams this week. I'm not going to assign you anything for the next week, right? Some professors have flexible attendance policies or allow one dropped quiz. That helps everyone relax a bit more. But there are always the other ones who talk and then do nothing. I had a physiology professor who taught us about the health effects of chronic stress and how it can hurt you. Then proceeded to have an exam scheduled for the first day back from Thanksgiving break. And everyone's like, hey, we really need this break. Would you mind moving it? And they gave us a straight no. So it definitely feels like a priority on academics at my school. I mean, it's so easy to fall behind because they give so much work that it feels like you have to prioritize academics no matter what. They say they care about mental health, but then, like, they don't make any adjustments even if you ask. And it's like, stuff like that Thanksgiving break situation, all that talk about care for mental health just kind of feels like empty words.
What would you tell your professors about this if given the chance?
As I mentioned earlier, the university has an issue with mental health, and we have, let's say, we used to have a really limited amount of counselors. I've heard they've been trying to improve it. However, during COVID, there was no spring break, and everyone was super stressed. So the university closed all the rooftops so that people wouldn't jump off of them. So instead of addressing the issue, which was that, like, you're not giving us any time to recover or any ways to have time to manage our stress, like, really relax, they just tried to close the rooftops. And it didn't really help because there were still a few people who tried to jump out of high places that just weren't as high as the rooftop that was closed. So that's not a good solution. You're not fixing the root cause. You're just trying to sort of address one of the symptoms. Universities can be doing a lot more to at least try, like closing a rooftop and saying we care about you isn't going to fix it. But maybe working on a more forgiving late policy might help. And that way, if someone's having something going on but isn't willing to talk about it, then at least they have a little cushion built in. I would just tell my professors about the other professors who have some of those forgiving class policies worked into their schedules that have helped make it easier for students. So, academic issues like mental health and academics above everything, I think, are some things that can be fixed.
How do you identify personally and in engineering? How to keep back. There was a heavy narrative shared from Sophie. I just wanted to see if there were any reactions. They don't have to be particularly academic.
She's right. Yeah, there are professors that are like that will actually be like, oh yeah, take care of your mental health.
And then do things that will really hinder you. Yeah, there are a lot of professors that don't mention it at all.
Mm.
I liked that there was here's something the faculty could do that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I wanted even more.
Yeah.
Hearing it is much more impactful than reading it, and I think it really focuses you on the content, and also it carries emotion much better, and that's very impactful. Like, you can hear the frustration and pain in her voice when she talks about, like, the psychology professor, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoy relating to these as both like researcher, former student, professor who maybe has the same. I've given exams on days that aren't convenient for people, and I also tend not to move my exams. Like, if I have a reason, moving it 2 days later is like not helping anybody. You're just going to be stressed, So like I kind of listen with that teacher positionality first because that's mostly on my mind, and then by the end of the narrative, I'm usually like, no, she's kind of right. Like it is. Both are a little bit true. Like, I still have my structures, and I do prefer to be a kind of kind, caring, but structured professor. Like, I find I used to be a little bit more wishy-washy, bleeding heart. Just like every time a student complained, I would just like upend every other structure I had and just be like, yes, good, you have an extension, you have an extension. And then like at the end of the semester, most everybody's unsatisfied because like the class is still stressful, and I feel like it helps me think both are a bit true. Like there are ways that, for instance, like we've heard a lot of people in the different narratives, like there's a lot of people who mention like the professor puts a little statement about caring about your mental health in the syllabus, and then they never say anything about it out loud. They especially don't say anything about it 2/3 of the way through the class when we're all struggling through midterms. And then that is the thing that feels like empty words. I'm like, oh yeah, I would be so guilty of that. Because like I really try to be, syllabus day one is my best time to be like intentional, clear about my values, like you can come anytime. 2/3 of the way through the semester when we're all busy, you know, like I'm sure I've been guilty of like not expressing enough. So like, it's kind of like a different plane of, you know, kind of like it gets through to me in a different way. Like and we've seen that when playing these for faculty as well. Like sometimes there's like people roughly react with like just dismissiveness. They're just like, well, you know, buck up, you know. But the majority, like I'd say like the more 60-70% are like reacting with a kind of like, oh yeah, like it does hit me in this like, you know, just different way. I don't necessarily have one way to change everything about, and some of the narratives are a little bit more, you know, like sometimes this narrative means people bring up like, where was the school? It sounds terrible. What's this like rooftop situation? You know, like I'm like, yes, these are specifics that like you might not have control. My university does stuff I question all the time. So like some of these are happening at different scales, but I like a lot of the faculty I think can kind of like hear through the story of like, yeah, like there's a way of better imagining maybe what the student experience is that like I should keep in mind, like their perspective on things like syllabus language, their perspective on things like these school policies, and even if the professor doesn't have control over it. By the way, yeah, to Robin's point, like the kind of like ending with, what would you have a professor do? We like in some of the piloting, we learned that we needed a little bit more of an end to the stories, like that ending on like just like the saddest things, whereas like just like people, yeah, like we're trying to like have more of a narrative structure with some sort of closure. But it's interesting, about half of the narrative topics, about half the time when you ask students, what would you tell a professor about this? They say, nothing. I don't think my professors would care, you know, about this topic. So this happened to be one that does have an ending. We ended up having kind of like two ways of ending. The two kind of like narrative structure endings that we allowed were either what would you tell a professor about this topic, or what would you tell another student like you, to kind of like give advice. Those are kind of like the two ways, but we usually, when they have this answer, I wouldn't tell my professor anything, I don't think they care, we usually include that fact as well into the narrative, because it's like, by the way, that's not great. They don't have any advice, but the advice is we should all maybe show that we would care more, you know, so. Okay. Here's some of the behind the scenes stuff about like the methods-y things. These were some of we did, it's a national study just because it was all on Zoom and it was easy to do, and also that we did in a little bit of piloting around FIU, I learned that like, I actually wasn't that comfortable with like playing students' stuff and professors in the same, even though we're 55,000 students, people really did not know who each other were. People kept trying to guess, and we were like, okay, never mind. We'll just do this for the one pilot interview, and we'll never do it again. They come from all across the country. Some of the pilot stuff did come from FIU, but like it's all sort of mixed up, and we don't do a lot of exactly. You heard like very little exact institutional context into the story. We kind of treat them more like representative stories, which is a trade-off, you know, like I know that there would be something gained by knowing which types of institutions people are at, but also something, you know, I've been, as an aside, we're looking at a lot of the faculty focus group data now, and I've been thinking a lot about engineering faculty and how they learn from qualitative data like stories, and like even some of the details, while this isn't like my students, like can kind of like shut their brains off a little bit. So I think like less is more perhaps, in like the kind of like keeping enough detail in that you understand it cognitively, enough emotional impact that you kind of feel it, and then, yeah. So anyway, we talked about the structure of the interviews, basically models that structure that you heard in that narrative. We talked about the identities the student has, like who are you, how does that work in engineering, kind of like what's important to you, salient broadly, how does it work in engineering. Then we talked about engineering educational culture. Sometimes we didn't use that exact word. Like, what's one thing you wish were different about engineering education is kind of our way to kind of let people talk kind of critically about engineering education culture, and then what's one piece of advice you give someone like you in engineering, and what's one thing you would tell your professors now if you could? We always asked both of those questions, but sometimes we were really hoping for this, like tell a story about yourself through the experience of engineering education, and then get to we want to hear the advice, but it didn't always happen. As one went in my grad student conducting a Zoom interview, and we talked about some intersections and visible, invisible identities to kind of help people think, especially about this kind of what's about you and what's happening in engineering educational culture. This is us doing some student actor script reading. Yeah, it was fun. You always, I guess, in ed research, you just end up learning to do stuff you didn't know. The audio part of this I did more or less know, but the being a voice actor director, I'd like you to take that again and sadder. You're doing it very angry. The student was actually sad, so I realize it might anger you, but this student, it was fun. we learned little things about matching gender, accent, age was important. We learned in piloting some of this to some faculty, they would say, even that was some of the local stuff too, they'd, if it was an FIU student, they'd be like, that student's not Venezuelan. I'm like, I don't know my Latino accents well enough to, but fair enough, you got me. So yeah, we couldn't match every single thing about them. We also emphasized, we've been using more cartoons for the visual because some of the visuals, we're all very visual society, so the visuals can be very distracting. When we would play videos, they even if the student actor had worn a tank top, people would be commenting on the tank top. I'm like, okay, the clothes are fully irrelevant here. These are not. We did not dress this person, in their engineering student clothes. Anyway. But yeah, we would reorder, anonymize, and synthesize the narratives into this structure because obviously everybody, we talked for 60 minutes and we're trying to get down to 10 for clarity. So there was a lot of narrative restructuring analysis. So these are the audio narratives. I think there's another 2 or 3 more than this. These were slides from February, but they're up on that Audio for Inclusion YouTube page. So these show some of the topics that we have ready. Indigenous women with Hispanic ancestry. We just heard Sophie's mental health. She does have a gender marginalization on teams narrative. I played mental health because I thought that would be, topical and interesting for us, but you can guess the gender marginalization on teams, I feel is, we've all probably read those papers, so there's a story like that. I think of these as also kind of faculty development tools, although the gender marginalization on teams might not shock any of you, if you wanted to do a workshop and talk about faculty marginalization on teams, or teach a class, a team-based class, and be as we enter into the teams, the nice, Sophie's story on gender marginalization is very kind of outside of the view of the professor is one thing I like about it. It's all those other behind closed doors team meetings that are lots of stereotyping and things. So Asian international woman with epilepsy, white woman with diagnosed anxiety, depression, autism, chronic pain, transracial adoptee from China with anxiety and depression, and a trans man with anxiety and ADHD. That gives you an idea. There's a few others, by the way, that we had, at this time, I don't know if it had to do with the way I conceived of identities and salience and how we made our recruitment materials, but it was harder to get Black students than I thought. We found there was an Indigenous student, which is relatively hard to find in all populations, but the first rounds of recruiting, we had few Black students, so we re-recruited. So at this stage in February, we had none, but currently it's Black and Hispanic students we've been intentionally recruiting and having those. So. We've been testing the audio narratives with faculty in virtual focus groups. I just screenshotted this from a poster Cassandra McCall made. So we've talked to 16 engineering faculty total. We talk about DEI topics. We play them the audio narrative, and we get feedback around 90 minutes. These are just some of the we kind of think of it as just real baseline validation. Is this useful? Would you find it useful? Kind of, we do a little bit of that. Just, do you engage in perspective taking when doing this? Would you share this with colleagues? Would you, like Aaron was saying, is the audio specifically useful? These are some of the other I'm trying to think about these faculty reactions, some of the like just clear reactions that people are having, and also some of the ones that are a little bit more interesting and confusing, like this thing I mentioned about like whether faculty can learn from stories, like kind of like if a lot of the qualitative details end up feeling distracting to them and they, it's hard to kind of take away lessons for their own context. But we saw people doing some empathy, perspective taking, like I recognize about his financial security, I imagine it's pretty distracting, like a level of stress in the background that's just constant. Some people doing some introspection, like maybe find themselves talking about their own student experiences or their own children. Agency to try something in their own classes. This narrative, that's what it refers to, has made me think about how to structure class time maybe a bit differently, where I can work more directly with students so they don't have to take the leap to send me an email. There was a lot of people expressing feeling surprised or not surprised. That was a real common one. Like if you're more of a DEI person, we just played you something real clear, you hear it every day, then first reaction, a lot of people say, I'm not surprised, but there were definitely some people who mentioned being surprised. These were some of the more kind of some of the more positive coded for us. We were kind of hoping people would increase empathy, perspective taking, introspection, feel like they could try something in their own context. Surprise is kind of neutral. I don't really care if I surprise people or not, but I sort of expected that might be one of the reactions. Then these were like slightly more negative coded, but sort of with understanding. Expressing professional tensions, I feel like it's not my place, I'm worried about invading their privacy. Like if expressing something real personal and thinking like, what would I do as a professor? People feeling like that's not really my job. Elsewhere, people saying like, well, I'm not a therapist, so like feeling like, someone, it's this quote down the bottom is amusing to me. It's unethical to give advice was like a long, thorough thought of this professor, which I was like, I really wonder what he meant. Like, it's not unethical to give advice, but I think he means like, I shouldn't give unsolicited like therapy advice. Like I shouldn't, which sure, but that it feels like he sort of like uses it. I had coded this as minimization dismissiveness. Sometimes they just want to bitch about something. So it, like he kind of like uses this sort of a logical connection, but then he like uses it to kind of like not think about the narrative at all. And feelings of helplessness or lack of agency. I feel helpless. I can empathize, but I can't do anything. So these ones were kind of like the negative, but realistic. And they're kind of, these were along the lines of what we were hoping to find. And these are kind of like, okay, like thinking, these are what we're dealing with. Let's think like how we could also support people maybe to not dismiss, feel a sense of agency, think what you could do about this. So we're also kind of thinking about, in that faculty development space, we're also thinking maybe what are maybe some discussion guides? How can we like maybe help faculty developers and people like think how would you help walk through a faculty who might be feeling one of these, since we know it might come up. So yeah, across this project, we were thinking about improving communication gap, adapting forms of research output for accessibility and immediacy towards faculty, and testing a mechanism for change. So as opposed to this prior model where we were just publishing in journals and hoping faculty would read them, now thinking about like how to like reach faculty more directly. If they're not going to read, maybe they'll listen. And then I just add this to the model, like presenting and writing about the process of changing faculty views in journals and conference papers, because part of the whole system is also writing things down, and that is a part of like the broader incentives here. So that is that example. In conclusion, make your research into the change you want to see in the world. That's it. Any questions or comments?
Thank you for your presentation. Have you shown have you used these in like student settings like you mentioned, and the teamwork, like, oh, you could bring this audio and the students could hear other students? Like, because I wonder about it from a like community building kind of perspective too.
I haven't yet. It's not part of the like change model, but faculty brought up, I want to play this for my students, like, I want to play some of those design team marginalization ones, like in my design class when we're about to head into that week, because it's makes it more real than just I want to be inclusive, I don't want to do this.
So something I think about and struggle up with is trying to change a system from within. And, right, like, we want to change the system, but we are also benefiting from the system, and we are also beholden to the system, right? Like, if you're like, nobody reads journals, it's like, well, I gotta write journals to get tenure, right?
Yes.
And there's like this tension between
Yes.
trying to change it from within. And so I just wonder if you have any thoughts about, like, as you do that, do you have any thoughts on like how you reflect upon what you're doing and think about like, how do you balance pushing against the system with being a part of it? How do you know when to keep pushing? How do you know when to back off? How do you know when to give up? I don't think there's a good answer.
Don't
and
give up.
No, I agree, but I think sometimes
Yeah.
you can't make change. There's a point where your mental health and your own personal safety comes into play. But how do you think about this or balance all of these aspects when thinking about change?
A thing I really like about my work, I feel like I'm able to be pretty honest at all points. So even like the fact of like, you know, I keep writing all these journal papers and I'm just not sure they're doing anything. How do you all feel? Like being able to write that into a journal paper, you know, part of the system, crediting, yeah, checkbox, another paper for tenure, but like being able to ask through the like writing process, through the grant writing process, like being able to like kind of like really reckon with the system is at least one, I find at least one, I don't feel like I have to sort of pretend about system impacts that aren't there, you know? And I feel like although the system, even now, even on this project, I heard that we were at EEC conference this past weekend, and related to this, I think we've already had, there's a lot of journal papers in progress. There's like, among all of the things that were planned for on this project, if I have some regrets, I'm like, oh, we were also supposed to do podcast dissemination, and I have found it really hard to find the time to do that. One thing I've learned is I am fine to talk forever, but I don't like listening to my own voice to edit it, and then I don't know how to train. I'm the one who knows about the audio things, so like that's my one regret. But apparently, Cassandra checked in with the program officer, and they just heard the message like, publish more and more and more journal papers. Yeah, that's the thing we need. Like, is it? It's not the argument we made for you. Like we knew we were going to publish journal papers, but anyway. So I think the being able to be honest about the system is, you know, like I think sometimes it still takes like some of your own pep talk or like your own like discipline to like stay true to whatever the mission was, like, and be honest about whether it's happening, you know? Because yeah, even in spite of a project where you're like, yeah, the whole point, we're gonna make this impact, then like midway through, it's like, oh, what do we really need out of this? And also, what am I most socialized for and most prepared for? I'm a fast writer, and no one's ever given me a PhD in podcasting, so it's just a lot harder to like pick up all of the like, you know, like get all the plates spinning on all the things that aren't the traditional like academic. So anyway, I think that's my pitch, is like that it's hard. It's definitely hard. It's definitely a little exhausting, but maybe that's also still the work, you know, put that exhaustion, put that like immovable system as like in the frame, you know, if you're like doing like design, like put it inside the design constraints. Now what do we do? You know? Like I think that's why on that second to last slide I was like, it's still included like we're gonna write journal papers, because I'm like, I just think that's realistic. We're all still gonna write journal papers. We're just gonna write a bit of a different journal paper, like alongside. Yeah.
I have two questions in the chat. And if the people who originally asked the questions would prefer to ask it themselves, please do so. I want to make sure we get time for these two questions. The first is, can you describe the process you went about in creating categories and or categorizing the faculty comments?
Specifically the categories of the faculty comments, right? That was the question?
Yes.
Right now, the grad students and Cassandra mostly are leading that. They're doing just open coding, but we've been kind of like thinking about different ways to conceive of the coding. We've looked up something called emotion coding, because we like had a sense that like maybe it's a 10-minute narrative. Like we might not really be looking for like deep cognitive change, deep like action-oriented change. We might be this level of like, I'm surprised, I feel helpless, I feel sad, I feel angry, you know, like those might be, that might be like a good benchmark of what we're looking for first. Then yeah, others just like were us trying to name what we thought was happening, like introspection, reflection. Like people would just start telling stories, like all of a sudden you're telling a story about your son. That's not exactly, you know, like wasn't on our radar, but it's something has come up for you that you're like thinking about this, you're thinking less about you, more about like a child, and therefore thinking more about, you know, you being a parent, and that's, so it's kind of topical, kind of emotional, but the thing that the like sharing of the stories and which details people might get distracted on was also a little, we were thinking a little bit about epistemology lately, and like the engineering professors may be like thinking, this is coming up on more than one project of mine where I try to work with engineering faculty, and maybe I like share something like there's a racialized dynamic to who participates in your class, and then like it seems like that is like a real big claim, and it's and I'm trying to like understand why is that seem like a pretty normal claim, like there's racialized dynamics in every setting I've ever been in. Why is this a big claim? And I think maybe, I'm thinking about epistemology lately, like where maybe epistemology, ontology, like maybe if I'm used to like single explanations, single like kind of like causal like models, then maybe these types of more qualitative understandings of things, like descriptive, multiple causes. I'm not saying any one cause, I'm just trying to describe an interaction. Maybe I'm really used to that as a qualitative researcher, and maybe if I think about a system that has like a little more linear control to it, then maybe I'm not used to like hearing these stories and multiplicity of things. Was there another question, Karen?
Yes, and they will ask.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Secules, it's Dr. Shannon Clancy. I had a question, so thank you. This was really interesting, particularly around like the methods, but I also had a question about distribution. So I think a lot of times, especially when you're talking about, incentivization of faculty to just push out research papers as the main product is how we get tenure, I think to Aaron's comment, et cetera. But I was also really curious, especially given that they are posted on YouTube, what has been your approach, whether it be intentional or not, or hope to be more intentional about distributing these narratives, not only to other researchers, but, other students that might have similar experiences with, maybe teaching faculty that aren't as engaged in the research, like how, or just in general, maybe even outside of academia, or even outside of, the research aspect, I guess, of academia. But I guess what has been your approach to distribute audio narratives, not just to, other engineering education researchers, and know that they actually exist and people can use them?
Yeah, I'm in my final year, and I'm like, this is the part that like really like let's make sure we don't like fail to do this. So you've probably saw like there's like still like just ever so slight typos in some of the like closed captionings and things. So like my perfectionist like of like I'm keep trying to like circle back with grad students like, okay. So we're like it's on YouTube. It's visible right now. It is like public, but it's like public in a way that I haven't like really inside the grant plans. They should be hosted on like a CDEI, ACE website. We should be sharing these at faculty development conferences and like get them into like faculty developer resource books. So yeah, like podcasting. The podcast idea was like to kind of like just do a kind of similar to what we all just did, like just listen, set it up a little bit, who are we gonna hear from, listen a bit, and then like talk about it just as people. I was thinking like kind of me and a guest maybe, like I've done a few with just collaborators, but I'd be open to like me and a student, me and a parent, like kind of like these are just stories that like people can react to like as humans. So that is getting even more intentional and better with distribution and like spreading the word is a goal. And I've just been thinking about these like life and busyness and incentives and like, kind of like my own standards and everything. And yeah, I'm hitting tenure this year. So I'm like reflecting and like, maybe I can like give myself some permission to like look at these other like, parts that I like have claimed are really important to me and are still hard relative to the journal papers, et cetera. We did get approached by a nonprofit the other day listening to these that like wanted to help. So we might, some of the stuff that's hard in my professor life, I might try to like ask the nonprofit for, like, if you could help give us either connections, consultants, like, you know, people who make podcasts a lot, people who make interactive, better faculty development websites than my grad students can make, you know. So we might, those are some, I'm also like kind of giving myself permission to like keep using tools and structures of universities, which is like asking for money, to try to like find, I don't think, yeah, I'm trying to like, doesn't all have to be exactly individually me and our team, because it is hard. But yeah, if you have other ideas about how to reach students with it, I think like, even like the, you know, like anytime you write an NSF grant, you have like just like a smattering of dissemination ideas, you just like throw them all out and like, we will do all of them. So to me, podcasting was like one of the real cool, I was really excited about getting to make a podcast about like qualitative research. Podcasting was one of the ones NSF was most skeptical of. Like they were like, will anyone listen to your podcast? And like it sounded like a real young person thing, but I was like, I don't know. I'm not that young, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I think like if you can make the podcast fun, cool, I think a lot of people would learn a lot by like kind of like just talking, listening to students talk. But yeah, Shannon, if you have other suggestions for me, I'd love proactive suggestions. Because yeah, there's stuff we planned in the grant, and then there's, you know, like a chance we're coming to the end of the NSF grant, which is, you know, has its structures and incentives. But I'm real interested in making it, you know, widely useful and spread. Partner with current podcasts, is that what that means?
Yeah, can you read it?
Can you read the comments,
does
Fatima,
Shannon-
or do you wanna put them, you have them up on the screen too?
I bet that's gonna be a similar thing that was stated as a goal in the grant. Hard to do all the things that.
There's two, there's one comment and there's another comment
Yes.
above, we could share.
Yep, thank you, Shannon. Shannon, you're actually reminding me, we literally have letters of collaboration from existing engineering ed podcasts, so just have to return, bring our materials, and that is a lot easier. Thank you for reminding me, because that is a lot easier than fully pulling off our own.
And there's one other comment about that last one. Let's see.
Awesome. Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks, Stephen, again.
Thank you.